HOA raided my home. I gave them the shock of their lives. It was supposed to be just another quiet morning. But instead, I heard the sound of boots outside my door. They didn't knock, they didn't ask, they just stormed in like they owned the place. They thought they could break me, they thought they could control me. But what they didn't know was that behind these walls, something was waiting for them. And when they found out, it changed everything. Welcome, friends, to HOA Max Stories, where real battles with homeowner associations come to life. My name is David. I live in a small neighborhood here in Texas, and for years I've worked as a contractor, fixing homes and raising my family. But nothing prepared me for what the HOA tried to do to me. Before we dive into this story, I'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Think of it as pulling up a chair with an old friend. We'll share stories, we'll laugh, we'll shake our heads at the madness together. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? I'd love to know. That morning, everything felt strange. The sky was bright, but the air felt heavy, like something was about to happen. I remember sipping my coffee, staring out the window at my yard, trying to enjoy a little peace before the day began. But then, I heard it. Boots on gravel. Voices whispering. The sound of my wooden gate creaking open. At first, I thought maybe it was delivery guys or a neighbor walking by. But when I looked closer, I froze. It wasn't neighbors. It wasn't delivery men. It was them, the HOA. Now, if you've never dealt with a homeowners association that's gone out of control, let me tell you, they don't knock. They don't smile. They don't even pretend to be polite. They come in with clipboards, uniforms, and faces that look like they're ready for battle. And on that morning, they marched into my yard like soldiers. Bright orange uniforms. HOA printed on their backs in bold white letters. Like some kind of army. I just stood there at my window, watching. My heart started racing. I knew they were angry with me. But I didn't think they'd go this far. You see, a few weeks before this, I had sued the HOA president. Yeah, that's right. I took him to court. Why? Because I was sick of the threats. The endless letters. The way they treated me and my neighbors like we were children who couldn't make our own choices. I had fixed my fence without their approval. I had parked my truck in my own driveway. I had painted my shed a color they didn't like. And they thought they could fine me for every little thing. Well, I fought back. I wasn't afraid. But when you sue someone with power, someone who's used to everyone bowing down, they don't forgive you. They look for revenge. And that morning, their revenge came walking straight into my yard. I set my coffee down, took a deep breath, and walked slowly toward the door. I could hear them now, their voices were louder. One of them said, "He's inside. Get ready." Another laughed, like it was some kind of game. I opened the door just a little, enough to peek out. And what I saw made my stomach drop. One man was already kneeling on the ground, right there in my yard, digging at the dirt with a tool. Like he owned the place. Like this was his property. Behind him, another man stood at the gate, arms crossed, eyes locked on my house. They weren't here to talk. They weren't here to reason. They were here to raid. And for a moment, I'll be honest, fear hit me. What could I do? It was two of them. I was alone. They looked confident, bold, like they had all the power. But then I remembered. I wasn't really alone. Not that day. I stepped out onto the porch, slowly, making sure they saw me. The man at the gate smirked. "You're not supposed to be doing construction here," he said. His voice was sharp, cold. Like a cop pulling over a criminal. The other one kept digging, ignoring me completely, like I was invisible in my own yard. Something inside me snapped. This was my home. My land. And they thought they could just storm in, without asking, without respect? I took a step closer and said, What do you think you're doing?" The man at the gate didn't even blink. He just said, "We're enforcing HOA regulations." I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. I wanted to scream, but I stayed calm. Because I knew something they didn't. I knew what was waiting inside. You see, I had called a few friends the night before. Men I trusted. Men who had my back for years. Veterans. Real fighters. And they were sitting quietly in my living room, waiting. The HOA thought they had the upper hand. But the truth? They were about to get the shock of their lives. I looked at the man at the gate. I looked at the one digging up my yard. And I smiled. That smile must have confused them. Because they stopped for a second, just long enough for me to say, "You boys sure you know what you're walking into?" His smirk faded. He looked at me, then at my house. And for the first time, I saw doubt in his eyes. But I didn't move. Not yet. I wanted them to sweat. I wanted them to feel what it was like to lose control. I leaned against the porch rail and said nothing more. I let the silence hang in the air. And in that silence, my friends inside shifted in their seats. Ready. Waiting. The HOA men didn't know it yet. But their raid was about to backfire in the worst way possible. And that, my friends, is where it all began. But let me ask you something. If it was your home, your yard, and the HOA came marching in without warning, would you stay silent, or would you stand your ground? Tell me in the comments, because I really want to know what you would do. That silence, it felt like it lasted forever. The two men stood in my yard, waiting for me to crack. But I didn't. I let the tension build, because I knew something they didn't. They thought they were in control. But they weren't. Not even close. The man digging in my yard finally stood up, wiping sweat off his forehead. He looked at me like I was dirt under his boots. "You've been warned," he said coldly. "You don't follow the rules, there are consequences." I didn't answer right away. I just studied him. His tone, his posture. He wasn't here to check my fence or my shed. He was here to make a show. To prove a point. To humiliate me in front of the neighborhood. But humiliation wasn't going to happen. Not today. The man at the gate stepped forward, slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel. He crossed his arms, squared his shoulders, and gave me that same smug grin. "You think suing our president makes you untouchable?" he asked. Guess again. That's when I realized this wasn't about rules. It wasn't about fences or paint colors. This was personal. I had dared to stand up to them, and this was their answer. And suddenly, my fear was gone. It melted into anger. Deep, burning anger. I straightened my back, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "You boys walked into the wrong yard." He blinked. His grin faded just a little. But he tried to hide it with a laugh. "Is that so?" he said. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just let the words hang. Because I knew what was coming. Behind me, the door creaked. Heavy footsteps echoed across the porch. And one by one, my friends stepped out. 4 of them. Veterans. Men who had served overseas. Men who knew what it meant to stand their ground. They didn't say a word. They didn't need to. Their presence spoke louder than anything. Strong shoulders, steady eyes, calm faces, like stone walls. I saw the HOA men freeze. The one at the gate stiffened. The one in my yard took a step back. The silence broke again, but this time, it wasn't from me. It was from one of my friends. A deep voice, steady as a rock. "You're trespassing," he said. "Leave now." It was like thunder. Sharp. Final. No room for argument. The two men glanced at each other. I could see it in their eyes, the doubt, the hesitation. This wasn't what they expected. They thought they'd scare me alone. But they weren't ready for 5 men standing against them. Still, pride is a dangerous thing. The man at the gate forced a laugh. "You think this scares us," he said. "We make the rules here." One of my other friends stepped forward, slow and steady. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He just said, "No, this is his land. And you're not welcome." The way he said it, cold, calm, absolute. Even I felt chills. Because I knew the truth. These men weren't bluffing. They weren't acting. They had stood against worse than this. And they weren't about to let a couple of HOA bullies push me around. The man digging clenched his fists. I saw the veins on his neck tighten. For a second, I thought he might lunge forward. But then, he looked at the 4 men behind me. And his courage vanished. He dropped the tool in the dirt. The sound echoed sharp in the morning air. Like a surrender. The man at the gate scowled. His eyes darted back and forth, looking for some kind of backup that wasn't there. He shifted his weight, scratched his chin, and muttered, "This isn't over." I smiled again. Not a friendly smile. A warning. "You're right," I said. "It's not. Because the next time you come here, you better bring more than threats." For the first time, he had no reply. No smirk. No laugh. Just silence. And slowly, step by step, they backed out of my yard. The gate creaked again as they left. And then, they were gone. The air felt lighter, but the fire inside me burned stronger than ever. They had tried to raid my home. They had tried to break me. But they failed. I turned to my friends. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence, their loyalty, it said everything. I looked back at the yard, at the tool still lying in the dirt. And I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end of the war with the HOA. It was only the beginning. But here's what I want to know from you. If you had 4 loyal veterans standing behind you, would you let the HOA walk away quietly? Or would you have taught them a lesson they'd never forget? Tell me in the comments, because I'm curious what you would do. The gate slammed shut, but the echo stayed in my chest. I stood there, staring at the empty path, watching the 2 men disappear down the road. Their footsteps faded, but the tension in my yard, it was heavy. My friends stayed quiet behind me. They didn't celebrate. They didn't cheer. They just stood there, like guardians. I could feel the weight of what had just happened. The HOA came into my home. They tried to raid me. And they walked away with their pride broken. But I knew them. I knew how these people worked. They didn't forgive. They didn't forget. They plotted. And something inside me whispered, this was far from over. I picked up the tool they had dropped. It was heavy in my hand, a reminder of their arrogance. They thought they could dig into my land without permission. They thought they could break me in front of my neighbors. Not anymore. Not after today. One of my friends, a tall man with gray hair and eyes like steel, finally spoke. "They'll be back," he said. His voice was calm, steady. Not a warning, just a fact. I nodded. "I know," I whispered. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made me tense. The creak of the fence, the bark of a dog, the hum of a car passing by. My heart raced every time. Because I kept seeing those orange uniforms in my head, those bold white letters on their backs. HOA. The next morning, I walked outside. The sun was shining bright, but it didn't calm me. I looked at my yard, at the patch of dirt they had disturbed. I could almost see their boots still pressed into the soil. It wasn't just dirt. It was my land. My freedom. And they had stomped all over it. The neighbors noticed too. Mrs. Carter from across the street waved me over. She was an older woman, kind, soft-spoken. But that morning, her voice was sharp. "I saw them yesterday," she said. "They came into your yard like they owned it. I was scared they might come here next." I could see the fear in her eyes. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us. The HOA had turned into something darker. Something that wanted control, no matter the cost. I promised her she'd be safe. But deep down, I wasn't sure. Later that day, I drove into town. I needed supplies. Wood, nails, locks, anything that could make my home stronger. I wasn't just fixing a fence anymore. I was preparing for battle. On the way back, I spotted something that made my stomach twist. A white SUV, parked at the corner of my street. Tinted windows. Engine off. Just sitting there. I slowed down, watched carefully. The vehicle didn't move. Didn't honk. Didn't leave. It just sat there like eyes watching me. I pulled into my driveway and glanced again. The SUV was still there. Waiting. My friends came over that evening. We sat around the kitchen table, the air thick with silence. Finally, one of them leaned forward. "They're watching you," he said. "They're trying to break you down before they strike again." I clenched my fists. "I won't let them," I said. "This is my home. My ground. They can't take it from me." We made a plan. We took turns keeping watch. One stayed outside by the porch, another near the back fence. I felt safer with them there, but the tension never left. Every creak in the night, every shadow in the corner of my eye, it all felt like a warning. And then, it happened. 2 nights later. Around midnight. The sound of gravel. Slow, careful steps. I peeked through the blinds. And there they were. Not 2 this time. 4 of them. Same orange uniforms. Same bold white letters glowing under the streetlight, HOA. They didn't come through the gate this time. They moved along the side of the fence, creeping, slow, like thieves in the night. My chest tightened. This wasn't a visit. This was a mission. I whispered to my friends. They grabbed their flashlights, moved like shadows themselves. Calm. Silent. Trained. We watched. We waited. And then, one of them tried to climb the fence. That was it. Enough was enough. I yanked the door open and stepped outside, the cold night air hitting my face. "Get out of my yard!" I shouted. My voice cut through the night like a blade. The 4 froze. One of them slipped, almost fell back to the ground. The others turned their heads, startled. My friends stepped out behind me. Flashlights beamed across the yard, lighting up their orange uniforms like spotlights on a stage. The men looked trapped, caught in the act. They tried to speak, but the words stumbled out. We were just checking regulations," one said, his voice shaking. I laughed. Not a happy laugh. A laugh that said I've had enough. Regulations? At midnight? Don't lie to me. They shifted nervously, their boldness gone. Their plan, whatever it was, had crumbled in seconds. My friends didn't move closer. They didn't need to. Their steady presence was enough. Their eyes told the whole story. "We dare you to try." Finally, one of the HOA men muttered, "This isn't over." And they backed away, disappearing into the night. I stood there, breathing hard, my fists clenched. This was no longer just about rules or power. This was war. And now I want to ask you. If you caught your HOA sneaking into your yard at midnight, would you call the police right away? Or would you confront them face to face like I did? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know what kind of fight you'd put up. The night after they crept into my yard, I sat awake in my chair, staring at the shadows on the wall. Sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the trees outside, it made my heart pound harder. I kept replaying the moment in my head. 4 men, in orange uniforms, sneaking like thieves through the dark. Not inspectors. Not neighbors. Raiders. And I knew deep inside, they wouldn't stop. They had been embarrassed once. They had been caught twice. Now, they were desperate. Desperate men make dangerous moves. The morning sun rose, but it didn't feel like a normal day. The air outside was heavy. Even the birds seemed quieter than usual. And when I stepped out onto my porch, my eyes landed on something that made my stomach tighten. A notice. Pinned to my fence. The HOA seal at the top, printed in black ink. I tore it off and read. Violation of community rules. Failure to comply will result in legal action. Immediate inspection required. It wasn't just a notice. It was a threat. They were declaring war in writing. I held that paper in my hands, my fists shaking. How far were they willing to go? Would they drag me to court? Would they try to seize my property? Or worse, would they come back in numbers? I didn't have to wait long for answers. That evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky red, I heard engines outside. Not 1. Not 2. 3 vehicles. I walked out slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears. And there they were. A convoy. HOA trucks lined up on the street, their headlights glaring like eyes watching me. Men stepping out, one after another, boots striking the pavement. Not 2 this time, not 4, but nearly a dozen. The president himself was with them. Tall, broad, his chest puffed out like a man who thought he owned the world. He had that same smug smile plastered across his face, the kind of smile that hides a storm behind it. He walked right up to my fence and called out, "You can't fight us forever." I stayed still. Silent. Because words wouldn't win this. Behind me, my friends appeared again. Shoulders squared, eyes sharp, silent as stone. The veterans had my back. And the HOA president saw it. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. But he didn't stop. He waved his arm, and the men behind him spread out across the street, like they were surrounding my house. I clenched my fists, my mind racing. This wasn't a raid anymore. This was intimidation. A show of force. They wanted me scared. They wanted me broken. But fear wasn't what they got. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us until only the fence separated us. "You came into my yard," I said, my voice low but steady. "You dug up my land. You broke my peace. You think numbers make you strong?" The president leaned closer. "They make us unstoppable." I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not a laugh of joy. A laugh of defiance. "You're wrong," I said. "Because I've got something you'll never have." He raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" I pointed back to the porch where my friends stood. "Loyalty. Brotherhood. Men who don't scare easy. Men who fought real battles, not petty ones." The veterans didn't flinch. They didn't even blink. Their silence was louder than any speech I could have given. The president's smile faltered. He turned to his men, but I could see it in their eyes too. Some shifted nervously. Some looked down at the ground. They hadn't signed up for this. They hadn't expected resistance. The standoff stretched on, seconds felt like hours. The sun dipped lower, the headlights glared brighter. It was a battlefield without bullets. And I wasn't backing down. Finally, the president sneered. "This isn't over," he said again. But this time, his voice didn't carry the same strength. It sounded weaker. Like even he didn't believe it. He waved his hand, and one by one, the men filed back into their trucks. Engines roared, lights flashed, and just like that, they were gone. The silence that followed was deafening. My yard, my street, it felt like it was mine again. But deep down, I knew this was just another round. They'd be back. And next time, they'd be meaner, bolder, more dangerous. I turned to my friends. They nodded at me, firm, unshaken. One of them said quietly, "They don't know who they're messing with." And he was right. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every neighbor they'd bullied. Every family they'd scared. Every home they thought they owned. I stood there, breathing hard, staring at the empty street. The HOA thought they could break me with numbers. But numbers mean nothing when the people behind them don't have courage. And I made myself a promise. The next time they came, I wouldn't just defend my home. I'd defend my whole neighborhood. But let me ask you this. If your HOA president showed up at your door with a dozen men behind him, would you stand tall and face him down? Or would you give in just to keep the peace? Tell me in the comments, because I want to hear what you would do. The night after the convoy left my street, I stood at my window again, staring at the dark road. The silence outside didn't comfort me. It only made me uneasy. Because silence, after a storm, never lasts. The HOA had tried to scare me with numbers. And they failed. But men like that, they don't accept failure. They find new ways. Sneakier ways. Ways that cut deeper than boots in the dirt. The very next morning, it began. I went to get my mail, and there it was. A thick envelope. Inside, pages of legal documents. Complaints, violations, threats of lawsuits. Every page screamed the same thing: "We will bury you in court." I sat at my table, reading every line, the anger in my chest growing heavier. Fines for my truck. Fines for my shed. Fines for unapproved modifications. Thousands of dollars worth. They wanted to crush me, not with fists, but with paper. I laughed bitterly. "Cowards," I muttered. They couldn't beat me face to face, so they turned to ink and lawyers. But even then, I wasn't alone. My friends sat with me, flipping through the documents. One of them shook his head and said, "They're testing you. They want to break your spirit. If you pay, they win." I knew he was right. But it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about principle. If I gave in now, they'd never stop. So I made my decision. I wasn't going to roll over. I was going to fight, harder than before. That evening, I called a meeting. Not in some office. Not in a courtroom. Right there, in my backyard. Neighbors came. One by one, they walked through the gate. Mr. and Mrs. Carter. Old Tom from 3 houses down. Even young families with kids trailing behind. They sat on folding chairs, eyes worried, voices hushed. They had seen what the HOA tried to do to me. And they feared they were next. I stood in front of them and spoke. They raided me. They threatened me. Now they're trying to bury me with paper. But this fight, it's not just mine. It's all of ours. If they can do this to me, they can do it to any of you. The crowd murmured. Some nodded. Some clenched their fists. And in that moment, I saw it. The spark of resistance. They weren't just neighbors anymore. They were allies. But just as hope began to rise, the HOA struck again. That night, long after the neighbors went home, I heard it. The sound of glass breaking. My heart jumped. I grabbed a flashlight and rushed to the back of the house. There, near the shed, shards of glass glistened on the ground. The window, smashed. And on the wall, spray painted in bold black letters, one word: quit. I froze, staring at the word. This wasn't just intimidation. It was a message. A warning. A demand. Behind me, my friends came running. Their eyes scanned the yard, their hands tight around their flashlights. One muttered, "They crossed the line." I nodded slowly. Yeah, They did. The next few days were worse. Phone calls at night with no one speaking. Trash dumped in my yard. Strange cars idling by the corner of my street. The HOA was no longer hiding. They were attacking from every angle. But the more they tried to break me, the stronger I felt. Because now, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for every neighbor who whispered in fear. For every family who just wanted peace in their own home. One evening, as the sun set, I gathered my friends again. I looked each of them in the eyes. They think fear is power, I said. But fear doesn't win against men who stand together. It never has, and it never will. They nodded, firm, steady. And in that silence, I made another promise. The HOA would regret pushing me this far. Because I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was a fighter. And my home was my battlefield. The battle lines were drawn. On one side, their papers, threats, and late-night sabotage. On my side, loyalty, courage, and a community that was waking up to their lies. And as I stood there, staring at the spray-painted word on my shed, one thought echoed in my head. They wanted me to quit. But quitting was never an option. So now I want to ask you. If you found that word painted on your wall, if your own HOA tried to scare you into silence, would you pack up and leave? Or would you dig in your heels and fight back harder? Tell me in the comments, because I know many of you have lived through battles like mine. The spray paint on my shed was still fresh when I woke the next morning. The black letters shouted at me from the wood, "Quit." But instead of scaring me, it fueled me. Every time I looked at it, I felt the fire inside burn hotter. The HOA thought they could push me into silence. They thought they could humiliate me in front of my neighbors. But what they didn't understand is that fear doesn't last forever. Eventually, fear turns into fury. That evening, the neighbors came by again. Whispers filled the air as they stood in my yard, eyes wide, voices nervous. They had seen the paint. They had heard the late-night noises. They knew the HOA was escalating. I raised my hand to quiet them. "I know you're scared," I said. "So am I. But look around, this is our street. Our homes. Our lives. If we let them win here, they'll never stop." An old man near the back nodded slowly. His voice cracked as he said, "They fined me for planting roses." My wife cried for days. A woman added, "They told me I couldn't hang my American flag without approval." One by one, stories poured out. Pain. Anger. Memories of being bullied, threatened, humiliated. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. The HOA wasn't fighting just me. They were fighting everyone. And everyone was ready to rise. But the HOA, they weren't going to back off quietly. I found that out the very next night. It started with lights. Bright headlights cutting through my blinds, flooding my living room. Engines revving outside, louder and louder. I stepped onto my porch, and there they were again. Not 2. Not 4. Not 12. More. Trucks lined across the street, filling the night with the growl of engines. Men in orange uniforms climbed out, dozens of them. The HOA had brought an army. My chest tightened, but I didn't step back. I clenched the rail of my porch and held my ground. The president was there again. His smug smile was back, wider than ever. "You had your fun," he called out. "But tonight, this ends." My neighbors peeked through their curtains. Some even came onto their porches, holding flashlights, phones, whatever they had. Eyes wide, breath held. I felt the weight of it all. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the entire block. If I broke tonight, they all broke with me. Behind me, my friends stepped out once again. For veterans, standing tall under the porch light, shadows stretching across the yard. They didn't flinch. They didn't blink. Their silence was a wall the HOA couldn't climb. The president sneered. You think these men scare us? You think you can defy the association forever? We own this neighborhood. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how blind he was. No, I said. You don't own us. You never did. And then it happened. From across the street, a door opened. Mrs. Carter stepped out, holding her cane, her voice shaking but loud enough to be heard. He's right, she said. You don't own us. Another door opened. Old Tom walked out, flashlight in hand. Then another. And another. Families, couples, retirees. One by one, the neighbors stepped out of their homes. They lined the street. Silent. Watching. The president's face faltered. This wasn't the show of power he expected. This was something else. Something bigger. I raised my voice, louder than I ever had before. You came here to raid my home. To scare me. To scare all of us. But look around, we're not scared anymore. My friend stepped closer, standing at my side. The neighbors stood firm, their flashlights like stars lighting the dark street. It wasn't just me against them now. It was all of us. The HOA president tried to shout something, but his voice cracked. His men shifted nervously, their confidence crumbling. Because for the first time, they weren't facing one homeowner. They were facing a community that had had enough. The standoff stretched long into the night. But eventually, the president's smile was gone. He turned to his men, muttered something under his breath, and waved them back. One by one, they retreated to their trucks. Engines roared, headlights flashed, and slowly, the convoy rolled away into the dark. The street fell silent again. But it wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of victory. I looked at my neighbors, their faces lit by porch lights and flashlights. For the first time in a long time, they looked free. They looked unbroken. I knew the HOA wasn't finished. Men like that never stop. But that night, something changed forever. The power shifted. And they knew it. Now I want to ask you something. If your entire neighborhood stood behind you against the HOA, would you be the one to lead them into the fight? Or would you step back and hope someone else did it for you? Tell me in the comments, because I know some of you out there have felt the same battle in your bones. The night the HOA rolled away, leaving the street in silence, I stood on my porch and looked at the faces of my neighbors. They weren't whispering anymore. They weren't hiding behind curtains. They stood tall, side by side, with flashlights in their hands and courage in their eyes. For the first time, I felt it. We weren't just a row of houses anymore. We were a community. And that terrified the HOA more than anything else. But I knew the battle wasn't finished. Bullies don't give up after one loss. They plot. They scheme. They wait for the perfect moment to strike back. The very next day, I got a letter. Not pinned to my fence this time, but delivered by certified mail. It was from the HOA's lawyers. Pages and pages of threats. They wanted thousands in fines. They wanted me in court. They wanted to drain me dry. I sat at my kitchen table, the papers spread out like a battlefield map. For a moment, doubt crept in. Could I fight them in court? Could I afford the battle? Would I lose everything trying to stand my ground? Then I heard a knock. When I opened the door, it wasn't the HOA. It was my neighbors. Mrs. Carter, leaning on her cane. Tom, carrying a box of files. Others, two faces determined, eyes sharp. "We're with you," Mrs. Carter said softly. "We've all had enough. You won't fight this alone." Tom set the box down on my table. Inside were records, letters, old violations, fines, proof of years of abuse. Everything the HOA had done to this community. Piece by piece, their corruption laid bare. I looked at them, stunned. "What is this?" I asked. Tom smiled faintly. Evidence, he said. Enough to show a judge what they really are. For the first time since this war began, I felt hope. Not just for me, but for all of us. We organized. We met in garages, in backyards, in living rooms. We gathered stories, letters, pictures, anything that told the truth. We weren't just homeowners anymore. We were building a case. A case that could finally end the HOA's reign. The day in court came fast. I walked into that courtroom with my neighbors at my side. The HOA president sat across the aisle, his smug smile stretched thin, his lawyers whispering in his ear. But this time, he wasn't the one in control. When the judge called my name, I stood tall. I told my story about the raid, the threats, the midnight trespassing. I held up the violation notices, the fines, the spray-painted word on my shed. And then, my neighbors spoke. One after another, they told their truths. The roses that were fined. The flags that were forbidden. The endless bullying. Every word chipped away at the mask the HOA president wore. And by the time it was over, that mask had cracked. The judge leaned forward, eyes sharp, voice firm. This association has abused its power, he said. These actions are unlawful. These homeowners have rights. The gavel struck. The sound echoed like thunder in the room. And just like that, the tide turned. The HOA president sat frozen, his face pale. His army of lawyers had nothing left to say. His power was gone. When we walked out of that courtroom, the sun felt warmer. The air felt lighter. My neighbors smiled real smiles, not the nervous ones they wore before. We had won. Not just against a man. Not just against a group. But against fear itself. Back in my yard, I stood by the shed and looked at the word still sprayed across it, quit. And I smiled. Because that word no longer stung. It reminded me of everything we fought through, and everything we beat. That night, the street was alive with laughter. Neighbors talking, kids playing, people who hadn't spoken in months standing shoulder to shoulder. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were living. And the HOA? They were finished. I leaned back in my chair, watching the lights in every home glow brighter than ever. And I thought to myself, this is what it means to take back your life. This is what it means to win. But now I'll ask you something. If you had the chance to stand in court, surrounded by your neighbors, facing down the people who tried to control you, would you speak up loud and clear? Or would you sit back in silence and let someone else carry the fight? Tell me in the comments, because your answer might say more about you than you think.